My name is Amalia Vega Mendoza, and I'm 22 now, but this story really begins 5 years ago, on the worst day of my life. Or maybe the best. I'm still not entirely sure. I never thought my own mother would leave me to die. I also never imagined that, out of that same cruelty, I'd finally discover who my real family was. Let me give you a little context before we get to the intense part. My father died when I was 8. Aggressive cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to the end. One day he was lifting me up in the air in our tiny backyard, and a few months later I was staring at a wooden box covered in flowers, wondering how the world could keep moving when he no longer existed in it. My paternal grandfather, Ricardo, Don Ricardo, to everyone else, stepped into the space my father left, like it was always meant for him. He became my father figure from the moment the dirt hit the coffin lid. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike, running beside me until his knees hurt. He was the one who came to my school events, even when my mother forgot the dates. He was the one who helped me with the math homework I hated and pretended to be impressed when I barely scraped a passing grade. My mother remarried 2 years after my dad died to a man named Fernando, and everything changed. I'm not going to say Fernando was exactly a bad guy. He just didn't want someone else's kid in the middle of his perfect new life with my mother. And my mother chose to please him. Visits to my grandfather became more spaced out. The calls shorter. I became a nuisance, an uncomfortable reminder of a life she'd rather forget. The only people who still felt solid were my grandfather and Lucas. Lucas was my boyfriend. We'd met at school when we were 15. He was the kind of boy who made too many jokes when he was nervous, with a lopsided smile that worked better on me than it should have. His ex-girlfriend, Bianca, still hovered around our lives like bad perfume at school events. Subtle digs, little comments, old photos that accidentally resurfaced on social media. It was nothing dramatic, just enough to make me second-guess myself some days. I didn't know it back then, but those flickers of doubt would later mirror the bigger betrayal I'd face from my own mother. The day of the accident was a Saturday in October. I had gotten my first motorcycle 3 months earlier, after working weekends at a supermarket and saving every coin. It was a used Honda, but in good condition, my pride and joy. I loved the sense of control it gave me, the way the city blurred by, and for a few minutes, I could pretend my life was simple. My mother hated that bike. "It's dangerous, Amalia. You're going to kill yourself on that thing," she'd say, arms crossed, eyes already sliding back to whatever conversation she was having with Fernando. Fernando simply didn't have an opinion, or at least not one he bothered to say in front of me. It was like I didn't exist in that house, like I was a guest who had stayed too long and couldn't take a hint. That morning, I had a stupid argument with Lucas. Something about him answering a late-night text from Bianca with a neutral, "we're just friends" tone that still felt like a crack in the door. I told him I was tired of feeling like a second option. He told me I was overreacting, that I was the one he wanted. We hung up irritated, both too proud to apologize first. I remember thinking, as I put on my helmet, that I'd text him later from Grandpa's house, that we'd fix it like we always did. None of us knew that by the time he finally saw my name light up his phone again, it would be from a hospital. I was on my way to my grandfather's house when a car ran a red light. I had no time to react. The impact was brutal. I flew several feet. I remember the sound of twisting metal, the asphalt scraping my skin, my body hitting the ground with a wet thud, and then nothing. I woke up in the ambulance. The pain didn't feel real at first, just a distant roaring under my skin. Then it sharpened into something indescribable. A shattered leg, 3 broken ribs, a head injury, internal bleeding. The paramedics were talking fast. Technical words I didn't understand, but their tone made it clear. Urgent. Very urgent. At the hospital, everything was chaos. Doors slamming, nurses shouting codes in clipped voices, bright lights burning my eyes. Someone cut my clothes off. Another person placed a mask over my face. I could taste plastic and blood. They needed to operate immediately, but I was a minor. They needed parental consent. A nurse dialed my mother's number. I was conscious. Barely. My vision blurred in and out like a badly tuned TV, but my hearing was crystal clear. It's funny how the brain works. It chooses the thing that's going to hurt the most and turns up the volume. The nurse explained the situation on speakerphone. Emergency. Immediate surgery. Risk of death if they didn't operate within the next hour. There was a pause. Then my mother's voice cut through the noise, cold and annoyed. "Let me know if she doesn't survive. I don't have time for paperwork. We're about to leave for dinner." The silence that followed was worse than the impact. The nurse stared at the phone as if it had just spoken in another language. Another nurse nearby covered her mouth with her hand. A doctor walking by literally stopped mid-step. "Excuse me," the nurse repeated, her voice shaking. "Your daughter needs emergency surgery right now." "I heard you," my mother replied, that same icy tone I knew too well. "If it's that serious, call my father-in-law, Ricardo Mendoza. He should be in the girl's address book. He can sign whatever is needed. I can't come right now." And she hung up. I tried to say something, but my throat closed. No sound came out. Tears did, hot and helpless, bleeding into my hair. Not because of the physical pain. That was almost background noise compared to the realization that my own mother had just chosen a dinner reservation over my life. An older nurse, a woman in her 50s with soft brown eyes, squeezed my hand. "Easy now, sweetheart," she murmured. "We're going to find your grandfather. Everything is going to be okay." They found my grandfather's number on my shattered phone. They called him. 20 minutes later, he came running through the emergency room. He was 75, but I had never seen him move so fast. His face was pale, his breathing ragged, his hands trembling as he grabbed the clipboard. My girl," he repeated over and over as he signed the papers, his voice breaking. "I'm right here. I'm not going to leave you alone." The surgery lasted 7 hours. When I woke up, my throat was dry as sandpaper, and every inch of my body felt like it had been set on fire and then put out with rocks. But my hand was warm. My grandfather's fingers were wrapped around it, his head tilted back against the wall, asleep in an uncomfortable plastic chair. His eyes were red and swollen. The nurses later told me he hadn't left that chair the entire time. The next 15 days were a blur of pain, medication, and slow, humiliating recovery. I learned exactly how much it hurt to breathe with broken ribs, how heavy a scar can feel, how long hospital nights stretch when you're waiting for footsteps that never come. My grandfather never left. He slept in that horrible chair. He ate whatever the nurses brought him from the cafeteria. He showered in the hospital bathroom. After the 3rd day, a nurse brought him a pillow and a blanket. They called him the guardian behind his back, with a kind of gentle respect. My mother never showed up. Not one visit, not one call, nothing. I heard the nurses whisper when they thought I was asleep. What kind of mother does that? That grandfather is worth his weight in gold. If she were my daughter, social services would have stepped in already. One night, I heard the head doctor on the night shift say something that lodged in my chest like glass. "This is abandonment. This is a crime." My grandfather never spoke ill of my mother in front of me. But I saw it in the way his jaw tightened when my phone stayed silent, in the way his eyes darkened when the nurses mentioned her. He had already lost his son, my father, and now he was watching his grandson's mother abandon me too. When I was finally discharged, he helped me into a wheelchair. We rolled out into the fresh air. It was almost blinding after so many days inside. He helped me into his old blue Chevrolet, carefully lifting my injured leg. He started the car, but instead of turning toward the house where I lived with my mother and Fernando, he headed in the opposite direction. "Grandpa," I croaked, my voice still weak, "we're going the wrong way." He looked at me with a sadness I will never forget. "No, Nina," he said quietly. "We're going exactly where we need to go. Your mother called yesterday. She said not to bring you back, that you live with me now." The pain that crashed over me in that moment was worse than the accident, worse than the surgery, worse than all 15 days of physical agony combined. It split me open from the inside. My own mother had officially, definitively thrown me away. My grandfather cried as he drove, silent tears that slipped down the deep lines of his cheeks. I cried too, both of us broken and trying to pretend we weren't. What neither of us knew then was that, at that exact same time as we drove toward our new life together, a man in a suit was knocking on my mother's door, and her perfect world was about to collapse. The thing about starting a new life is that it rarely feels like a clean beginning. It feels more like drifting into the wreckage of the old one and pretending it's a destination. My grandfather's house smelled exactly as I remembered from childhood: fresh coffee, old wood, and the butter cookies he bought from the neighborhood bakery. It was the house where my father grew up, where photos of him hung on every wall. It was the closest thing I had to safety. He set me up in what had once been my dad's room. The same baseball trophies still sat on the shelf. The same adolescent photos still clung to the wall, faded by time, but full of life. He adjusted my pillows, set my medication on the nightstand, then sat on the edge of the bed with a heaviness I could feel from across the room. "Rest, Nina," he said softly. We'll talk tomorrow. You need strength. But I couldn't let it go. Grandpa, what did she say exactly? He hesitated. My grandfather never hesitated. Then he exhaled a deep, tired breath. She called me yesterday afternoon, he said. She said you've been a problem for years, that Fernando isn't comfortable having you around, that now that you nearly died and will need care and therapy, she doesn't have the time for it. My stomach twisted. She said it's better if you live with me from now on, he continued, voice trembling. She also said she wasn't going to pay for your medical expenses, that since I signed the surgery papers, it was my responsibility. Silence swallowed the room. I didn't cry. Not then. I think I was already too hollow to produce tears. I stared at the ceiling, absorbing the final confirmation of something I had sensed for years, but never dared to believe. I didn't have a mother. Not really. I had someone who had given birth to me, fed me, occasionally dressed me nicely for holidays, but never loved me. Nina, my grandfather whispered, you are not a burden. You never were. He didn't know it yet, but those words saved pieces of me I didn't know were shattering. I fell asleep from a combination of painkillers and exhaustion, drifting into a heavy, dreamless darkness. But while I slept, something else was happening. Something no one would tell me until much later. At exactly 7 p.m. on the 15th day after my accident, my mother and Fernando were getting ready to leave for dinner. She was putting on her earrings. He was checking his watch and complaining about the traffic downtown. Then the doorbell rang. Fernando opened it to find a man in a perfect gray suit holding a leather briefcase. Good evening, the man said. I'm looking for Mrs. Patricia Vega de Mendoza. My mother sauntered out of the bedroom, still fastening her second earring. That's me, she said with her usual coolness. What is this regarding? The man opened his briefcase and removed a thick manila envelope. My name is Mr. Ramirez. I'm here to inform you that you are being sued. The color drained from my mother's face. A lawsuit? By who? For what? By Central Hospital, the lawyer replied calmly, for abandonment of a minor during a life-threatening emergency. The state is also pursuing a case of gross parental negligence. Mr. Ricardo Mendoza appears as a supporting plaintiff on behalf of his granddaughter, Amalia. My mother laughed, an unhinged, desperate laugh. That's ridiculous. I didn't abandon anyone. The lawyer didn't flinch. According to hospital records, your daughter was admitted with multiple severe traumas requiring immediate emergency surgery. You were contacted. The call was recorded as per protocol. You refused to come, stating, and I quote, "Let me know if she doesn't survive. I don't have time for paperwork." Fernando stepped back, physically distancing himself from her. I didn't say it like that, she stammered. They misunderstood me. The lawyer continued. During your daughter's 15-day hospitalization, you made no visits, no calls, and provided no support of any kind. He handed her a stack of documents. You have 14 days to appear at the preliminary hearing. He turned and left. My mother stood frozen in the doorway, legal papers trembling in her hands. Fernando finally spoke after a long silence. Patricia, this is serious. This could affect my job, my reputation. I didn't sign up for this. And just like that, the man she sacrificed me for began stepping away from her, too. A week after my discharge, my grandfather sat down with me in his little kitchen, pouring fresh coffee even though I couldn't drink much yet. I sought legal advice, he began carefully. What your mother did, it's not just wrong, it's a crime. And the hospital had already filed a report. So you sued her? I asked quietly. I requested full custody, he corrected, and I supported the state's case. I kept documentation over the past 3 years. The times she left you with me for weeks while she traveled. The receipts for your school supplies she refused to buy. The calls you made to me crying because you felt invisible at home. My throat tightened. I didn't know you kept all that. He looked at me with soft, watery eyes. A grandfather always protects his grandchildren. I felt a strange warmth in my chest. Something like peace. Something like safety. Something I hadn't felt in years. What happens now? I whispered. You heal, he said. You go to therapy. You finish school. You build your future. I will take care of the rest. The preliminary hearing was cold and clinical. My mother showed up with a cheap, disheveled lawyer who clearly hadn't read the case file. The hospital's attorney, on the other hand, walked in carrying a binder thick enough to crush a small animal. They played the recording. My mother's voice echoed through the courtroom. Let me know if she doesn't survive. I don't have time for paperwork. The judge, a severe woman in her 60s, closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing the ugliness of those words. My mother tried to argue that she thought I was stable. The hospital responded by presenting logs of 4 unanswered calls updating her on my critical condition. She hadn't responded to a single message. Fernando wasn't with her. He had broken up with her 2 weeks earlier. She stood alone. The judge took one long look at her and delivered her verdict. Complete loss of parental rights, a fine of 50,000 pesos, a permanent mark on your record, and a restraining order preventing contact with Amalia until she turns 18, unless she gives explicit consent. My mother cried, shaking, sobbing into her hands. I felt nothing. Not anger, not revenge, just emptiness, like watching someone else's tragedy. My grandfather placed his hand over mine. "You're safe now," he whispered. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I believed him. 2.5 years passed. If you asked anyone who knew me back then, they'd say I was doing well. I'd finished high school on time, earned a scholarship for industrial engineering, and even landed a part-time job at a consulting firm. My leg had healed after months of physical therapy, though whenever a storm was coming, it ached with a dull, nostalgic throb. But the truth was more complicated. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was a maze, twisting, looping, sometimes dragging me backward. Some days I woke up grateful. Other days, one memory of the hospital lights flickering above my gurney could freeze me in place. My grandfather helped me through most of that labyrinth. Therapy helped with the rest. And slowly, I learned to build a life that wasn't shaped like a wound. Through it all, Lucas stayed beside me. We had our moments where old insecurities crept in. Bianca, his ex-girlfriend, tried reviving their connection with the subtlety of a fire alarm. Vague messages, photos popping up on his stories, little jabs meant for me to see. What surprised me was Lucas. He started blocking her, shutting the door she was trying to pry open, choosing honesty, even when it embarrassed him. One night, he sat on Grandpa's porch with me, holding my hand under the dim yellow glow of the porch light. "Amalia," he said quietly, "you're the one I choose. I need you to believe that." I did. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't competing with a ghost. Life wasn't perfect, but it was finally mine. Then, one quiet Thursday afternoon, everything cracked open again. I was in the campus library studying for midterms when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Mama. My whole body went cold. She had found my new number. Before I could convince myself to ignore it, the notification expanded, showing the first few lines of a long message. "Amalia, please, I'm so sorry. I've been in therapy. I need to explain. I need your forgiveness." I locked the phone so quickly the librarian glared at me. For 2 days, I didn't respond. I didn't even open the message. My brain felt tight, compressed, like too many thoughts were trying to cram into one space. Finally, I showed my grandfather. He read it in silence, then handed the phone back gently. "It's your decision, Nina," he said. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." A week later, I agreed to meet her. Not for her, never for her. I did it to close a chapter that had been left cracked open. We chose a public coffee shop downtown, neutral ground. My grandfather parked outside and waited in his car with a newspaper he pretended to read. She arrived 15 minutes late. I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair, once impeccably styled, was tied back in a limp ponytail. Deep circles carved themselves beneath her eyes. She looked smaller somehow, fragile in a way that didn't evoke sympathy, only truth. She sat down across from me, wringing her hands. "Amalia," she whispered, "thank you for coming. I know I don't deserve—" "You have 5 minutes," I said calmly. Talk. She blinked in surprise, then launched into rehearsed regret. She apologized. She cried. She said Fernando had isolated her, manipulated her. She said depression had clouded her judgment. She said losing everything had opened her eyes to the truth. But she never, not once, said the one sentence that mattered. "I chose to abandon you." Instead, everything was someone else's fault. She talked for 12 minutes. I watched every second pass on the wall clock behind her. When she finally went silent, I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Are you finished?" I asked. She nodded, hopeful, too hopeful. "Okay," I said quietly. "You talked. Now listen." Her posture straightened, like she was waiting for forgiveness to be delivered on a silver tray. "I don't hate you," I began. "Hate takes energy. I'm not willing to waste on you." Her face tightened. "But I don't forgive you either," I continued. "And you are not my family." Her lip trembled. "Amalia, you had 17 years to be my mother. You chose not to, over and over. When I was dying, you chose a dinner reservation. That wasn't a mistake. That was who you are." She inhaled sharply, tears slipping down her cheeks. But I've changed, she whispered desperately. Please believe me. Maybe you have, I said. But that's not my responsibility. My healing can't depend on your transformation. Her shoulders crumpled. My grandfather gave me everything you couldn't. He gave me love. He gave me a home. He showed up every single day. He chose me. I stood, placing a few bills on the table. I hope you find peace, Mama, truly, but find it without me. I turned and walked away. She called my name once, just once, but the sound felt like a stranger calling for help on a street I no longer lived on. I stepped out into the sunlight. The air was clean and crisp. My grandfather saw me approaching, folded his newspaper, and unlocked the car door without asking a single question. How was it? He asked softly. It's over, I replied. He nodded as if he'd known that would be the answer all along. We drove home in quiet companionship, the kind that feels full instead of empty. Years passed like gentle waves, steady and predictable. I graduated from college. Lucas and I built our relationship with slow honesty instead of fragile hope. Bianca eventually disappeared from our lives, storms dissolving into distant clouds. And my grandfather remained my anchor. Every morning, we drank coffee together. Every Sunday, we watched soccer. Every week, he shared a new story about my father, as if stringing memories into a tapestry he wanted me to keep forever. He turned 78 last month. We threw him a small party. He smiled the whole time, though he's slower now, his steps more deliberate. I still live with him. I could move out. I even planned to once. But when I saw him fall asleep in his armchair, soft snores filling the living room, I knew these years were precious and not unlimited. My mother never contacted me again. 5 years have passed since the coffee shop. I hope she's well. I genuinely do, but I don't need to know. What I do know is this. Family isn't blood. Family is who shows up. Family is who stays. Family is who chooses you when things get hard. My grandfather slept in an uncomfortable hospital chair for 15 nights. He fought legal battles for me. He rebuilt his life around making sure I had one. That is family. My mother chose a dinner reservation over my life. That is not. I am finally at peace with that.